All right, so welcome back to the channel. My name's Kevin.
I'm Tarsha.
And this is Conversations with the Crawleys. We have conversations about faith, family, relationships, and we do recaps, reviews, and commentary on some of the favorite shows we watch. But this one is all about a movie we just watched. So, if this is content that you enjoy, or if you're here for the first time, hi.
Hi.
We appreciate you stopping by. Hit that subscribe, hit the like, request notifications.
And share.
And we'll see you in the comments. And consider becoming a member. Membership has its privileges and gets special live streams that we're going to start later this month. All right. So there's a movie that come up on our feed a couple of times.
Right. I think it just came out this past weekend.
As of the filming of this, yep. And first it was like, I think our daughter first pointed out to us a few months back. She's like, oh, okay. We were like, oh.
You were like, yeah, no,
okay.
Thank you. We're not really into a lot of Christian movies.
Yeah. And so, but then it came out and we were like, okay, there's a lot of conversation about it, right?
A lot of conversation. Even someone we know who said someone else saw it and almost didn't sit through the movie.
Yeah.
So it was like, maybe we should see what this movie is about, because I asked you about it and you said, oh yeah, Twitter's saying one thing and Facebook is saying something else.
There was a definite generational difference in how things were being perceived. So Facebook, which has morphed to be more the older crowd, if you will, Gen X, which is us, but more Facebook was saying, no. Twitter and Instagram were like, oh, it's great, it's amazing. So we're like, okay, let's see it. And again, if you're first time here, just by, you're making things plain.
Or the title, something caught your attention,
right,
in your what they call algorithm?
In the algorithm, yes. So we are pastors. We've been pastoring a church here in Phoenix for 7 years now. We've been in ministry since we got married 26 years ago, and even before that, I was doing some things in ministry before that. So,
me too.
We know the church, right? We know the church world. We know the church culture,
the ugly and the indifferent.
We know some stories that might blow your mind, and we know the behind the scenes of some stories that you might have heard. So, but you won't get that out of us. But we wanted to kind of talk through this movie because it does deal with church culture. We went into it, just being honest. The first time we watched it, we were like,
oh, I can't watch this movie. It's awful. This movie is awful. I can't watch it. From a lot of aspects, right? Anything that you're actually a part of, you don't want to see mimic.
Right.
Because of someone's perspective on the outside, they think it's maybe false or just entertainment or theatrical, right, or dramatic. So that part of you are like,
Or for me, it was things that, yeah, it's one. Some of it was just the stereotypes that you hear about in the Black church. That, if we're honest, those stereotypes do have some basis in truth because these are people's experiences, right? So we're not negating that. But it was sometimes just, for me at least, the initial was just like, okay, there's nothing new here, right?
You're not putting a new perspective on an old situation.
Right, or a consistent situation. Right, because we are talking church culture, and church culture does have its church culture when we're talking about the organization, not what God intended, right? And so we said, yeah. And then we came back and was like, okay, let's at least finish it out.
Correct, because it is somebody's story. Even though they create it as a movie from maybe their past experience or the past experience of others combined.
Taking a whole conglomeration of everybody, different experiences.
Or what you see on TV or in the news or what's been on social media, because church is on social media just as much as any other industry, anyone else's life is being portrayed out in social media.
Yep. So we made it all the way through.
Right. We was like, we'll see it again from the beginning. We have a different perspective when we watch it and looking at it, because everyone has different views about church, especially Black church.
Exactly. Because there, if you grew up in the black church, there are things that you know. I mean, for example, one of the running jokes as far as black church is you can go in at 11 o'clock in the morning and not come out until Thursday afternoon at 3. Right? Depending on, I grew up in a church where church was 3-4 hours, and then we had the evening service. And then if there was the choir anniversary, it was like every department had an anniversary, right? So you had the choir had an anniversary, the children's choir had an anniversary, the young adult choir, the nursery guild. I don't know why the nursery guild had an anniversary service, but
the kids,
right, so that the babies could come and crawl down the aisle. So these are things that are part of the church culture experience, right? So we said, okay, let's watch this, and we watched it, like she said, from the beginning. Not trying to critique it from, is this a good movie or bad movie, but just kind of seeing the perspective that was there.
Or if it's supposed to be uplifting, right, or encouraging. It was just more like, let's just hear what someone's story is about the black church.
Right. And it also kind of mirrored some elements of the controversy or whatever with Bishop Eddie Long, as far as the rumored things as far as his lawsuit years ago before he passed. So there were some things that were like, okay, I see you're trying to use things that have happened within church as inspiration for, or at least a template, if you will, for this movie. So, but for me, I think one of the things that was kind of surprising was it morphed somewhere along the way.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to kind of just give a simple setup, obviously they start where the church is doing good in the community. Mm-hmm. The church is giving back.
Right.
And you see this church of what they call mega churches, because multiples of people gather and they give back in the community. Mm-hmm. Politics, city politics, they meet at the church.
Yeah.
And so you see this setup of, well, everything is working like the church should. It should, mm-hmm, be a part of the community. It should, right, be given back in different ways. And it goes from that to the church closing to all of a sudden we have everything's focused on the pastor and his wife that are left, right, at this church.
Yeah.
And so, as you were saying, it begins to morph from what they do, how they dress, yes, what they wear, how they act on Sunday, then how they act during the week or when they're in the car alone.
Nuck if you buck, right?
Right.
So, but here's one thing to point out also. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that what many times we see as the mega church, and just names that we hear from time to time, Bishop Jakes and Creflo Dollar and Eddie Long, which, like I said before he passed, was inspiration for at least the character, right? Seemed to be. Those are, if we're honest, they're the outliers. That's not the average church size. The average church size, if I remember my statistics correctly, is like under 150. And that's including the mega churches. So we see the mega churches because they are large and they're very noticeable, if you will. But the average church experience was not, in my opinion, the average church experience. I don't know that it was reflected in this movie in some ways. There are some things that's like, yeah, we've seen that.
We can see it before, like having a scandal and, mm-hmm, yet there's people still faithful.
Yep.
People still covering up for their pastor. Mm-hmm. Some not believing what they heard, or, mm-hmm, or trying to keep an open mind that when they've talked to their pastor, they've only done good by them.
Right.
And so giving that aspect of it, and then seeing the pastor, should pastors have multiple clothing of high price value? Mm-hmm. Should they be driving in luxury cars? So they were portraying some of that and putting that out there.
Right.
Should the church have multiple ways of influencing the church? Should they have dance, mime, hip hop, like all the different things they were kind of laying out, yeah, in the perspective of this couple?
Right.
Because now it becomes focused on the couple because there is no congregation anymore.
Right. But even at focusing on the couple, we I think, begin to see kind of a focus more so on the first lady, right? Mm-hmm. And just our setup that we have, we minister equally, right? I am the senior pastor. She's the executive pastor of our church. But in some circles, the first lady is that's the role, the title would have you, for the woman that is, married to the pastor, but does not minister, does not, grace the pulpit or anything of that nature. Depending upon your church background, your church structure, all of those things, right?
It could vary to doing very little and just being seen and not saying anything, to being very involved in the women's group, women's ministry, in all parts of the church. Right. And so, but for her, because I thought it was even interesting, they called her Trinity. And I don't know if anyone caught that, because she's being called Trinity, but in her role here as the first lady, she was the biggest counsel to her husband, but at the same time, it wasn't showing that she was reflective as being valued to right. and by the church as a whole.
Yes.
And here her husband is accused. First of all, let's be honest, you're supposed to be married to your wife, but now there's scandal that you're having a homosexual relationship with several people who are saying they've been manipulated, right. or they've been coerced into this relationship. Right. And so now she's taking on the role of trying to get them back to status quo, right. being this person involved. And
she's almost, the way that the first lady in the movie, Regina Hall, was portrayed, treated, whatever, was almost like she was the producer of this stage play that was called church. That's really, right. And yes, if we're honest, there are some circles where that is the case, right? There's a lot of things in this movie. What I'll give this movie credit for is it did pull a lot of things from church culture, how sometimes it can be staged, how sometimes it can be produced, overly produced, and the authenticity is not always there. So it became, in some respects, a story about the first lady
right. taking
taking off her mask. I don't know if y'all caught that.
Right.
And realizing that, we've set some things up that, because his ego got really out of control, where he's like, I saved these people. Nah, bro.
And I saved myself.
Yeah.
And it was just all about him. And when they've lost sight of who God was, they lost sight of who got them where they are. And they allow the idols, right, which are things that you worship instead of God, right. to take its place. Yeah. And it came to a point for her, even for her being just a woman. I think they really tried to identify her as a woman, because even her needs sexually as a wife was not being met by her husband. Yeah. And they portrayed that in the movie. And so here she is trying to be this Christian wife and add on the title of First Lady. Everything was more of an appearance. Right. But you could see this inner turmoil in her that wasn't being released. Even to the point where they had a scene with the mother. And her mother, she's like, look, I don't think I can stay married to this joker anymore. I'm done. And the first thing her mother, instead of her mother saying, tell me, baby, what's exactly going on? Where's right. your pain at? She's like, are you a Christian? Yeah. What that got to do with? Yeah. I'm a woman too. Right. And I want to have a loving, caring relationship with a man who's not going to cheat on me.
And not be an accessory. Because that's really what she was for the pastor in the movie. She was an accessory, right? She was just a suit for him to have next to him, if you will.
Yeah. And so even in those scenes with her mother, which we would think would be there to comfort her and to say, I support you in any decision you make. And, she was more like, you need to buck it up. Like, you need to suck it up and do your role, because God had to put you with this man and you're blessed with all these things. But if all those things doesn't place you having a happy, loving home, right. then there's something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it was an interesting movie. It was.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it interesting.
Well, when I say interesting, that's not always it's interesting. Sometimes it's like, that's interesting. So it was an interesting movie for me. It was not something I'd probably watch again.
No.
But it did do, I think it did what the writers intended for it to do, which is to at least shed some light on parts of church culture, whether it's overblown or not, because there were some things that were like, okay, seen that happen, but it's not as common as you want to make it. I think the other thing that I thought was interesting was the other couple that was in the story, the younger couple. In many respects, I think that they were on the same path or track as the older, as Sterling K. Brown and Regina Hall in the movie. They were those characters. I think they were essentially just them at a younger age, essentially. So.
Yeah. And I guess we'll see, right? At the end of the day, even with us being in different churches, and we've seen things go down.
Yeah.
Like, we've seen some things go down.
Let's just say, let's just be honest. There are some of the things that we saw in the movie, some of the things that you all know as far as church culture, they're actual, they're valid, right?
Right. But what I'm getting at is that we never took our focus off of God.
Right.
We never allow people, because we know people are human.
Right.
People make mistakes. That does not take our love of God and what we know that the church can be.
Right.
And finding places where there are safe places where you can worship God and know that all people are working to be, have a closer relationship. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, unfortunately, we lose people because of what they see. They just like, well, I can't go to church, or I don't want to be a part of church because I experienced the same thing. The church is the hospital.
Right.
There are hurting people in there, and sometimes it's even in the leadership. Mm-hmm. And again, you may have to back from the place that hurts you, but that should not back you out of God.
Right.
And finding a place where you can have that worship.
Yeah, agreed. So listen, but that was our 2 cents.
Right. There's a lot going on.
What was the other thing? Oh, tie is expected.
Oh yeah, because if you look at the sign, it says Honk For Jesus. And even Regina Hall says that a lot of people that those were real honks.
Yeah.
So the people that were driving by were actually honking, and they didn't even know what they were honking at.
Right.
They just saw people that says Honk For Jesus. So there's aspects where you can look at life and see humanity throughout that's not of Christ.
Right.
It wasn't a good example. It wasn't a good example. It's all the things not to do.
Right. Right. So,
or churches you might want to stay, if you hear those things, stay out.
This is our thing for you, right? If you're watching this, if you're part of a great church, stay at your great church. If you're a part of a church where there is toxic behavior, find a life-giving, word-teaching church. Yes. Simply put.
Yes.
We've had the opportunity to be part of great churches, and in our opinion, at least, build a great church, right?
Yes.
And so find the place, because your relationship with God is more important than being at the latest, greatest church that may not be what God intended and may not be healthy for you, right? Let's just be honest to say that.
Exactly.
So hopefully, you popped in here hoping for more controversy, but we gave you kind of just our opinion on it, our thoughts, and validated some things for you, but also helped to clear up some things for you. And that's it for this one. Definitely make sure you're hitting that subscribe. We have hopefully great content on this channel. And
we do. We got great content.
We do. Yes.
I feel like we give our opinion that could assist anyone to at least be open-minded and have some perspectives that will help them to grow and mature.
Yep. So we'll see you next time. Have a great one. Be blessed.